Thanks in part to the Freedom of Information Act, enforcement agents Napoleon Solo and Ilya Kuryakin can now discuss their most celebrated affairs.
I was doing the lieutenant, as I just mentioned, and I got a note at Camp Pendleton where we were filming when I got back that night to MGM, there would be a script at the main gate there where, believe it or not, the guy's name was Ken Hollywood, who was at the gate. He was the main guard there, Ken Hollywood. And I should pick up the script and meet Mr. Felton at 9 o'clock the following morning in the Thalberg building where he had his office on the MGM lot. Well, Gary and I, Gary Lockwood played the lieutenant, were both bachelors at the time, and we had a couple hours left on the Sunset Strip after midnight, so we went and hit a few places, the Rain Check Room and the Viper Room, which became, it was the Melody Room, then it became the Viper Room, more famous where Phoenix cashed in, River Phoenix, or the other, was it River? Who was the one that died in front of the bar?
No idea.
Well, the Phoenix is now dead, is the one. Anyway, I didn't read the script. All I noticed was it said Solo on the top of the script. So I knew the drive from my house to MGM was 30 minutes, so I got up at 7:30 and whatever. I guess I left about 8:45. You know, I left at 8:15. And at red lights, I read the script fast as I could because I was normally a fast reader. So I got into Norman's office, 9 o'clock exactly, 12 o'clock in New York. And he said, what do you think? Well, first we talked about the lieutenant for about 30 seconds, and then he said, what do you think? And I said, well, to me it looks like it's, I don't know. And I literally made this out of, I said, James Bond on television. He said, don't say that. He said, you want to do it? And I didn't know what he meant by that. And I said, yeah, I definitely, I got a green light from me. And he said, okay. He picked up the phone and said, kept me in New York, whoever the person was. Right away he was on the line. He said, Vaughn wants to do it. Okay, put the phone down and said, have your agent give me a call, make a deal. That was how it happened, just like that. Later I found out many other things, but that's how it happened for me, as opposed to the way they do it these days, where you read for 16, 21-year-old MBAs from Harvard before you even get to see anybody connected with the show when you're being cast in the lead, certainly. That way it was done. Back then it was done by one phone call to New York.
No, I'd come off to as the greatest story ever told, playing Judas Iscariot. And I remember 3 pilots came to me through the agent, or not scripts, but just the ideas. One was Judas Iscariot, which I didn't think would have a very yes, it's a large following. The other was Alexander the Great, and I thought all that armor and rushing around, no way. And then there was this Mr. Solo, which I had 2 lines and a bunch of jazz records. So it was not a contender. There was no, I mean, it had to be the last, and I said yes. And then went down and shot the pilot.
Well, I knew David because I had loved him in Freud. I'd seen the picture, and I thought he photographed sensation. I thought he really was beautiful on the screen. I mean, it wasn't anything terribly intense, but I mean, it was an optical thing. And then everybody in town wanted the role of Judas Iscariot in The Greatest Story Ever Told. I being one of the ones that wanted it. He got it, so I knew of him beforehand. Freud and Greatest Story Ever Told. Whether you knew of me or not, I don't know.
Well, actually, I didn't.
Well, there you are. On the pilot, I guess, wasn't it?
Probably in the commissary. That's where everybody met at MGM, over a Pat Boone sandwich or whatever it was.
Yes, they had a sandwich named after me, which was just a terrible sandwich, and I immediately sent a memo to Robert Whiteman, who's the head of the studio. I said, either change the name of the sandwich or eliminate it from the menu, because it's embarrassing. I don't know why I would get so excited about a sandwich, I don't know, but I was.
You know, we have a problem here, because this didn't happen yesterday. It happened, what?
40 years on, as
odd
they say.
Years ago.
Odd years on, yeah.
And I have a general idea of being on the set, and specific moments, you know, girls in polka dot bikinis and Leo being very funny, but to remember how I felt on the first day is absolutely impossible. Sorry. I will speak first this time. When I came onto the show, I had 2 or 3 lines in the first episode, and I had a bunch of jazz records under my bed, and I don't think there was much else said about Ilya. So I was very, very minimal. And I think Robert was doing all the work, and I wasn't there that much because I was at home because I wasn't called. And it wasn't until the show started to get going after 2 or 3 or 4 episodes that my part began to get a little larger. When the writers saw the relationships between us, they began to develop. But in the beginning, I had very little to do with anybody.
That's true. And ultimately, through fan reaction and general reaction to the show, David indeed became the co-star of the show. And some people have asked me in the past, then and now, did that bother me? I said, well, no, I have some very dear friends like David Janney, no longer alive, and other friends who were in every shot of every show that they did, and, and including doing publicity on the weekend. And I said, I didn't realize it at the time until we got into the last half of the first year, that how much time it actually took out of your life, in addition to publicity, of being on screen all the time. And we were able to share that time for the balance of the 3.5 years the show was on the air, and I thank God for it. Plus the fact that a great deal of the success of the show was dealt by his performance as Ilya, because he made something out of nothing. There was nothing there, as he said in the show. It was a guy named Ilya who's a Russian, we guess. We don't even know that. And whatever happened was developed through his personality and how he was going to play Ilya, making him...
Meanwhile, of course, Robert was wooing all the ladies and getting the girl, which was the one thing.
That was a little ancillary benefit. I wasn't going to bring that up in front of either of our wives. I found out after the fact that he'd gone to college with my stepfather in Iowa, but I always remember both he and Sam Rolfe back often in the shadows watching us rehearse and do the scenes. They weren't on. They may have been on the set a great deal. I wasn't aware of them if they were, but they really didn't involve themselves with us on the set, certainly, in terms of discussing anything. They just came down, nodded their heads, smiled, and they both were very tall gentlemen, 6'2" or 3", and so they kind of stood out in the background. And that's all I knew about Norman, except I'd worked for him before then, the season before, the first Uncle season, on a series called The Lieutenant. And he told me, I asked him at some point later on, why did you select me for this role? I said, because, I mean, there's nothing in my background necessarily that I'm going to be playing this kind of part. And he said, well, during The Lieutenant, he said, after they would say cut, you'd say something cutting and mean and funny. He said, and that to me was Napoleon Solo, i.e. James Bond, and that's one of the reasons I thought of you. That's the story.
Yes, and these tall gentlemen, Sam and Norman, would come down around 11 o'clock in the morning on a normal day, and it was known as the hanging committee because they just watched dailies, and they would come down and talk to the director about what they'd seen and what they needed to do. But I remember with Norman, he did come rarely to the set, but once I remember we were getting towards the end of the day on Friday, and it was the last day of a show, and we were not going to make it. It was 6 pages in 3 hours or 2 hours. And Norman came down and called everybody into the middle of the stage and said that so-and-so a time, it's 12 minutes past 7, you will wrap and you will do those 6 pages. And he turned around and walked off. And we did. But he was absolutely in charge, but never showed it.
Yeah, very much so. To get high ratings.
Well, I've always heard, and this may be apocryphal, but I have always heard that Norman Felton and Sam Rolfe sat down together and said, you can make an awful lot of money in this world out of merchandising. What kind of a show would that entail? And then they thought, well, you'd need a gun, you'd need a communicator, you could do lunch boxes, lunch pails, or whatever they're called, and so on, and badges, and an association, and if you're fighting crime, I mean, it sort of snowballed, and then they built around that the idea of an organization, and that became, I mean, this could not, maybe it's not true, but it seems awful, the way it all turned out. And we always think that the man from U.N.C.L.E. was Leo G. Carroll, and we were the sidekicks.
Said, yeah. He was the class of the show. Absolutely not, as far as I'm concerned, because politics was never discussed in relation to the show. I discussed a lot of politics a lot of the time with other people, but never in relation to the show at all, no. Well, a lot of people thought that it was a real uncle, and they wrote in asking to join the organization and get badges and everything like we wore. I'd say if the show that we actually wound up doing influenced anybody politically, I'd say we're all in deep trouble because of the lunacy of anybody thinking that way. But they did think that way, no question about it. I mentioned one time I was co-hosting a parade in Minneapolis with Hubert Humphrey, who was then vice president, and one of the Secret Service guys with Humphrey came over to me at one point, I think this was in January of the first year, and asked if I could get him some Uncle cards for the rest of the team that were working. And I thought he was kidding, of course, and he wasn't. Gave me his address, and all the time he's got the thing in his ear and he's talking away. That's when I knew that the show was on its way in some bizarre way, somewhere I wouldn't even know it was going to go. And right after that, it did.
Yes, I remember being at the White House and being told by a Secret Service agent that the president will see you now, Mr. McCallum, which is always cool. And you go up those steps past all the bougainvillea and the Marines in their uniforms and everything. And as we're going along, the agent sort of whispered in my ear, he said, "You're the reason I've got this job."
Yeah.
It seems that a lot of young people joined law enforcement as a result of U.N.C.L.E. and ended up on that detail and other details.
I was never invited to the White House for obvious reasons. I did meet him, LBJ, once, but that's another time for another book and another story. There was a writer who had been a spy and an actor also, whose name escapes me at the moment, who would make casual comments if he was in the show as an actor, but other than that, no one suggested I do anything except show up at 7:30 and get...
Was that Joe Sorolla?
No, that was the voice, you mean. No, this was a guy who actually had lived in the South Pacific or something, been a spy. He was an actor, and he wrote a couple of the shows. And you'll know who he is if you check out the shows, I guess. Start watching 105 shows to find him.
In photography, they made leaps and bounds because Fred Konikamp decided that he wanted to shoot a certain speed, and you know, we were in black and white and then color, so color was very young in television, and he developed a system where they shot at, I think it was 60-foot candles, and then they would go to the lab, which was right there at MGM, and develop this whole technique of producing color without having to rate it very high and lots of lights. And I know that was cutting edge at the time, definitely.
He was under tremendous pressure to shoot 6 days. A much longer show in terms of minutes than they shoot now, but it had to be in 6 days. I don't know, we would lose a day along the way, and then we suddenly pick it up, but it was a terrible amount of pressure. We would do 50 setups a day sometimes, and that's, you know, you do 6 setups, 8 setups, 10 setups a day today in television. And it was all the pressure was always on Konikamp. Well, developing methods to get the sunlight at 8 o'clock at night in the wintertime still reflecting on the actors' faces. This is one of the main problems, because we, of course, got shorter and shorter days, and therefore less outdoor time. I can't be specific past that if anybody making a contribution, but I know Fred was able... Oh, I'm sorry. Till Gabani, our wonderful guy. Tilly Gabani, what's it called, the camera?
Arriflex.
Arriflex. In those days, it was just a big lump of a thing that made a lot of noise. And Till made an actual suit that he could get inside of and look out of the suit, which was soundproof, and he would actually get in, when we had a fight scene, he would get in to the fight somehow and he'd take pictures. And that was an enormous conversation.
Strap it to his head.
Yeah, he had it to his head, and of course that was unusual, if not unheard of at that time. And now Arriflexes, of course, we don't have that problem, but he made it. That was a big contribution.
He was meticulous, because I remember once he was teaching me how to use the Arriflex, which I did quite frequently. And there was one shot that I did, and when I finished, I went like that and switched it off, and he grabbed me and he said, "You never do that." He said, "You've got to think of people watching dailies, and when you do that, you switch it off and then you drop it, because they must never know this is a handheld shot."
That's right.
His dictum.
One curious thing about Till was that his wife made him a full 3, 4, 5 course Italian dinner every night that he would eat for breakfast in the morning.
In the morning.
That's what he had in the morning.
And then he would come and comb lot 3 for all these Italian leaves. You know, there was arugula and stuff out there.
That I didn't know.
Then he'd take all these salads back for his wife.
He never read the newspapers, incidentally. And he would go home and have 4 or 5 drinks, go to sleep, and just get up and have his Italian dinner and go to work. He was a very happy man.
Smoke a cigar.
And smoke a cigar. He was always smiling and always happy.
So Hollywood. Not at all in my case.
Zero. I made a decision based upon your question. I said, since there is no background to this, and I couldn't take James Bond because it wasn't what it was supposed to be, I thought, well, this is the, if you will, romantic lead in an adventure show. that I should try to appear on screen with women, at least, if no else, as attractive as I could be, both personality-wise and looks-wise. And that was the extent of my deep penetration into the role of Napoleon Solo, was to look as good and as act as nice and charming as I could.
To start the show off, what we did was we go out and do entrances and exits, driving cars out, driving come back.
Yeah.
So if we did a whole mass of those outside Del Florio's, the tailor shop, various other places. So we would do this, and then they could cut them in through the year. I discovered that if I wore a black suit and a white shirt and a black tie, that was basically going to be my clothing. And in order to make a change, I took my coat off, slipped a turtleneck over the white shirt and tie, and put the jacket back on. And throughout the entire series, that's all I wore. So for the, what was it, 300 what's it years we did it, he's changing clothes every 5 minutes.
Every 5 minutes.
And I never changed my clothes. It was so cool.
And I'm still having that battle with my wife today about changing clothes. I'd like to just be in what I'm wearing right now every day of my life for the rest of my life, but she wants me to change clothes, unfortunately. One thing I found out about fairly recently was that when I did a pilot for Blake Edwards before U.N.C.L.E, it was the only other pilot I had done, didn't sell. It did it twice, as a matter of fact. Blake went out and interviewed and talked with girls that had known me, dated me, or I'd worked with to find out whether I had any appeal. This was for his show. It was called The Boston Terrier. And basically they came back with very nice compliments, which I won't go into now. But they all came back with a similar negative comment. Said much of the time when he's done being all these other things, he's very remote and detached and almost not there. So I think, well, I can't put that into the part. It doesn't make any sense to me not there, so I scratched that off of a list of things I had to do well. But I found it out after the fact anyway.
But you've always been not remote, but detached and in your own world. It's something that I really loved about you, because you're always there totally when the moment comes, and the rest of the time we don't have to worry about you because you're so self-contained and studying, which I always
studying a lot.
Admired,
a lot of reading, yeah.
And in my case, all I did when it came to anything personal, I suddenly realized that it was a great idea, that people found him more attractive if they made up their own idea of what Ilya Kuryakin was like. So whenever there was a specific, I would quote Shakespeare or throw it out or change it. We did that. And eventually they did an article, I think it was in Life magazine, where Ilya was described as a climate of negatives, which was a wonderful, I felt, boy, I have succeeded. I am playing a climate of negatives.
Well,
womanizing in your case.
Woman, all right, I'll handle that. Well, did have, and will always have a terrible fear of water. So they were constantly writing me into water scenes in the show. The writers were, who I got to know I was quite friendly with, Peter Fields and Dean Argo. Otherwise, I mean, if Napoleon Solo were a real person, he would be a psychotic sociopath because he exposed himself to death on a weekly basis for 3.5 years. And I have great disdain and fear of violence of any kind, verbal or physical, so I was very unlike Mr. Solo in that sense.
In my past, there was a wonderful actor called Michael Bryant, who came over here in many productions with the National Theatre. And when we were in repertory way back, he said to me one day, he said, always remember when you're on stage that it's you that's there, and over your head is a tram line, and that tram line is your character, and you have a hook, and you hook onto that at the beginning of the play, and you go right through, and that line has to be consistent and always there. But he said, never forget that it's you underneath holding onto that hook. And it really has something I've used in everything I've ever done. So Ilya is me, just as what I'm doing now, the pathologist, Dr. Mallard Ducky, is me. You can't get away from that. You hook on to the character, but it's you that's in playing the part. Were you ever challenged? I thought it was the greatest fun and games I've ever gone to.
Strictly, the challenge was trying to get more fun out of working every day. That was the greatest challenge of all. No, it wasn't challenging. As a matter of fact, I can confess this now, 40 years on. After the first year, I rarely read the scripts at all because it was always the same story. Meet with Mr. Carroll, you go this way, meet a girl, you go that way. Then we meet with Mr. Carroll at the end. And I would, if I didn't understand something, I'd ask Joyce, the script girl, what does this mean here? And she'd tell me what it meant, and that was it. And that was how I did the last 3 years of the show. I really didn't read them because I was quite busy reading other things.
But it's fun when you do that, because when you see it, you can find out what it's all
You're
about.
You're surprised. Oh, is that what I was? Is that what I meant when I said that?
I still do that, I have to confess. I think the relationship between us was developed by the writers, not us. I mean, we did, and then they would look at it, and then like a tree, you know, they'd see us do this, write this, and so on. And that's how that happened.
And they knew that we were personally cordial, so they could write bickering into the script, and it wouldn't be something that we had to stretch for or something. We could be bickering, or we could be pleasant, because we had no personal problems together. All the fan magazines, of course, said the exact opposite, but that was never true. No, but he was terribly funny, I'll tell you that. He was 71 when he started the show, and he was complaining from day one that if they ever knew I was this old, they never would have hired me. Well, of course they knew how old he was. Hitchcock said about Leo G. Carroll, he was the perfect screen actor. And I know exactly what he means, because the man was able to stand there and completely charm the pants off the audience and both of us with no effort whatsoever. He spoke very slowly. He always knew his lines, and when he didn't, he would get them if he didn't know them, which was rare. And he just was a very compelling force and a believable head of this international spy organization, and a slight British twist with a pipe or something like that, too. But he was also very funny. I'm not going to reveal some of the funny stuff because I'm putting that in my book.
I always remember when they left a camera running once, and Leo, in a very loud voice, said, "Come in, Honolulu." And it became a catchphrase on the show. And the other thing, when we were coming to the end of one of the years, and I said, "Are you going to go away on a vacation? Where are you going to go, Leo?" He said, "No, my wife and I are just going to stay home and watch each other fall apart."
I remember
and
that.
then I said, "Wouldn't you like to go away somewhere?" He said, No, David. There are too many classics left unread."
I was privy to both those conversations.
I'm sorry, am I spoiling
No,
your
no,
chapter
I've already
book?
written that.
Oh.
So it's done. Yes, he lived close to the Hollywood Library, and whenever he wasn't on the set, which was only 1 or 2 days a week, he was literally at the library, because friends of mine said, "Did you know Mr. Waverly is hanging out in the Hollywood Library?" And I said, "Well, I do know now, yes."
I'm a British actor that's arrived in Hollywood and is in MGM doing a series that's almost #1 or is #1 with all these people. I mean, the whole thing was just fabulous. I mean, you never really got that analytical about the show.
No.
I never really looked at the script and said, "Oh, Peter wrote this," or so. I never. It was a script, and I looked for my lines, and I had fun doing it. And I remember going. I had a little time off, and I had to swim in the back lot, and so I had a scuba tank, so I went out and went down, and water and all that, but I found this great big hole. So I went right down the bottom, and it was black, and I came up, and I went over to the special effects guy, and I said, "What is this great big hole in the water, in the pond?" He said, "That's where they did all the Johnny Weissmuller dives. They would build whatever he had to dive off right there, surrounded by jungle, of course. And he would dive off, and this was to allow him to have the depth for all the Johnny Weissmuller
One of the
dives."
other stages at MGM had the pool that Esther Williams used all the time in all of her movies. It was a huge pool, enormous.
And we were constantly discovering this stuff. We had these dressing rooms, what were they, 12 feet square, 10 feet square, with a bed and a makeup and a wardrobe. And they hooked them all together like railway trains and dragged them around the lot. And one day I came across a little one that was 6 by 6 by 6, and it was rotting. Remember over by the wall? Yeah. So I talked to Wally, the sound guy, who was a wonderful historian of MGM. He said, "Oh, that's Judy Garland's," when she was doing Wizard of Oz.
We said that together.
And I said, why couldn't they have kept it?
Well, that's another key thing, is that when there was a set that had stopped being used for a movie, everybody would rush to find out how long that set was going to stand, and then they'd write an episode, hopefully incorporating the script, which reduced the budget considerably, obviously, because they were renting from MGM as opposed to building for MGM, or having MGM build for us.
which meant we got some pretty big sets.
Yeah. See, it's wonderful when you suddenly realize you're in a hit show and you can say, "I'd like an office, I'd like a phone, I'd like to have a golf cart."
We were you in the same place? There was the Colonel, whatever his name was.
Well,
Elvis Presley.
Elvis had the first floor of this building, his music company. And Elvis was there much of the time. In the morning, he'd arrive with a big long Cadillac with 3 phones on the floor. One was the Colonel, one was his mother in Memphis, and I don't know what the other one was for. So I'd see him on a fairly regular basis. Then also the guys from combat, who were always covered with dirt and everything, were always sitting in the hall, and I was always in a tux, so I have to step over them so on to go up to my second floor of rooms. And I had a bed and a small room for a secretary, another small room for myself. So
we had these great places, wonderful places up there. And also in the ground floor was a dance studio with all the markings on the floor from where Fred Astaire had done all these musicals.
I didn't know that.
All his writing and such like still there.
And they never charged you for the phone calls, I noticed that.
Really?
And I would call all over the world.
But I remember also there was a doctor who would come by whenever you needed anything, and there was this briefcase, and it was just full of pills.
Yeah.
He didn't have any equipment in there, just pills.
The only time I was ever hurt on the show, and I did a lot of my own stunts as David did his. I was getting off of a boat somewhere down in Catalina or something, and in order to jump across the space between the water and the boat, I grabbed a hold of a pipe that was there, and the pipe was red hot, and I couldn't get my hands released from it, and it hurt like hell, and I couldn't use the hand for quite a while. But best time I had was on the Jack Palance show. I think that was the last show we did.
He was just having Jack Palance.
Yeah, he was an immense screen presence, both off the screen and on. And I had just done Hamlet with his wife at the Pasadena Playhouse, and he was sitting in the audience during rehearsals. And you tell me that isn't a creepy thing to have Jack Palance sitting in the office watching you kiss his wife and my mother in the play, that is. That's what I remember most vividly was Jack and his presence.
It is more the people that we had on the show that you remember than the actual situations. Because George Sanders, Elsa Lanchester, Joan Crawford,
Vincent Price, Marty Balsam.
I mean, it just goes on and on.
Janet Leigh.
And that produced images that...
And these people were on the first year, incidentally, most of them. And one of the reasons they were on, that I was told, was once the young kids discovered it, they said, Mama or Grandma Joan Crawford, whatever, you got to get on that show. So people would actually request to be on the show who were well known. That was partially the end of the first year and the beginning of the second year. One time I was sleeping, the set was closed, the stage was done, and I didn't have to go anywhere, and I had a little tiny, it's about 6 by 6 or 8 by 8 portable room at that time. And for some reason they weren't moving it to the next set, so I was sleeping late in the afternoon on a leather couch in the bar. And I had a sign up, which I eventually took down because everybody didn't like it. It said, if you knock, you better have a goddamn good reason, which wasn't too friendly, I guess, so I did take it down. So there was no sign there. And there's a knock on the door, and I kind of woke up. I said, who is it? The voice said, Katharine Hepburn. I said, come on in, Katie. Well, it was Katharine Hepburn with 3 kids who wanted an autograph. And that was the most startling thing that occurred during Uncle in terms of a famous person visiting the set.
Oh, there's a wonderful photograph of me with Nelson Rockefeller and his wife and all these children. And I was doing a tennis thing on back lot, so I'm in white, and so are they. We're all in white clothes. It's a funny photograph. And of course, I have Gloria Swanson. That's just another photograph.
The only credentialed Republican I knew was our Fred Koenikamp, so I was able to introduce them to each other, and they both were happy meeting each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think. I mean, I might have said that. I'm not sure, but I grew to know Peter Fields very well. I had dinner with him almost every night, and he was constantly working with Dean Hargrove. So out of those dinners, I think he used to add some things I might have said in the script. But other than that, I never tried to push anything that I had in mind because I thought the scripts were very good, particularly the first season, went exactly on the money. And the reaction was obviously good, so I didn't think why.
But towards the end, we used to work on the tag, as they called it, the end of the show. They had a little wrap-up scene, and they'd do something goofy or something. And those are the only things I felt needed to be improved. And we did. Yeah, they were wonderful about it. I remember once somebody said, your scripts are this, in an interview, and I said, oh, we make it up as we go along.
I'm sure the writers love that.
And Peter got very upset. Yeah. And I said, I was joking.
Yeah.
We didn't ad-lib very much. We would create business to find the humor in the scenes, like firing 5 shots at a handle and you know it's already open and stuff like that. I mean, it's whatever. I mean, you looked for places to make things amusing, but the scripts basically were written wonderfully, and we just stuck to them.
We did ad-libbing after the director said cut sometimes, which usually got a laugh, and then kept the atmosphere of the set jocular and everybody just like, we had a lot of fun and a lot of laughs and didn't take it all very seriously in terms of artistic input, but it was fun to go to work every day, really fun.
I think there's an awful lot of hype involved in all this because we never did something dangerous. Both of us are wise enough not to do dangerous things. Secondly, the insurance companies who insured the show would not allow us to do, and the assistant directors would not allow us to do them. What we did was to do, what I did, and I'm sure Robert did too, was to do very carefully laid out where you were physically doing something which called for a little agility and coordination, and hopefully you didn't hit anybody when you shouldn't. And they took a little bit of physical effort, but no more than a good workout in a gym.
Yeah.
And then the publicity department took over, and we were doing these insanely dangerous things.
When there'd be a fight scene, my stunt double was named Dick Geary, and when there'd be a fight scene, early on I made it clear to Dick that I didn't want to see the fight scene until he was done choreographing the fight scene, because I didn't want to learn anything physically. I didn't have to learn physically. That's how we set it up. He would go in, and when the last time before we were going to shoot the take with me in it, then he would do it for me, and I would just remember it as you'd remember choreography in a dance. And I've been reasonably well coordinated all my life, sports-wise, so it was not a big deal. And I knew how to throw a punch.
When Sonny and Cher came on and did the one all about the tailor shop,
yeah.
And Sonny insisted upon doing the fight and wouldn't let the double do it. And he just turned the wrong way, and a stuntman laid him out cold.
Well, before I did U.N.C.L.E., I did a picture in Munich with Cliff Robertson. He insisted on doing the fight scene with me, and it wound up the other way around. I hit him, he moved in the wrong direction, and I knocked him down. And it hurt my hand like hell, I'll tell you that. That was the last time I had a couple times after that, they said, the actor would like to do and I said, no, I want to do it with the stuntman, or have somebody else do my part, because I don't want to work with an actor anymore, because it might be me on the receiving end of the wrong punch.
But high falls are fun, because you're landing on the biggest mattress you've ever seen in all your life. I only remember one episode where I did something where I almost did myself a terrible injury. And I was doing a takeoff of Slim Pickens, is that his name, coming down on the atom bomb at the end of
That was the
Strangelove.
first show of the first season.
And we had a great big rocket, and I straddled it, and the wires were here and there, and then they lifted me up, and I was like holding on like that, and they tipped it slightly. I don't know what the scene was, but it began to move, and it began to, the point where I was actually going to go over, but my thumb was underneath the wire. I remember that so clearly, and I knew if I stay on this thing, I'm going to be without a thumb.
Yeah.
And I just bailed and hit the floor. You know what I mean?
Well, I had the one that my wife is still talking about.
Oh, really?
We had in the U.N.C.L.E. headquarters, there was a long walkway which had a cover on it. And I guess it was the first or second show, and David I guess I must have been on David's, I don't know how it worked out, but somehow the noise of the gun going off and the explosion wrecked my ear for a while. I had tinnitus.
It was 4 or 5 corridors all coming together, and it reflected right into your ear.
And other than that, I never had any.
So that's when we went from shooting bullets to shooting whatever they were that paralyzed.
They made a little
people.
sound instead of an explosive sound.
We were in a cellar once, and Robert was hanging from the ceiling, and I had a Bowie knife. And I ran into the room, and I threw the Bowie knife, and it cut the rope, and Robert fell down. And when we came to do it, there's a wire. I drop the one I'm holding down my back, and they fire one on a catapult up the wire. It hits the wall beside you. They release Robert, and he falls. And I dropped it, and it went like this. I didn't do anything, and they fired the catapult, and the knife, when it was about halfway, the wire broke. And it was heading. For about half a second, I thought, series over. And it buried itself in the wood right by Robert's that ear, and quivered. And he got down and got his book out and started to study. And I was thinking, that was a very close call.
I don't remember that, but I certainly agree with you. It sounds like a close
Well, you
call.
probably didn't know it broke. You probably just
But
realized
yeah,
it was
yeah.
all part of the act.
Well, the first season for me, even though it was in black and white, was closer to what I thought the show should have been the entire 4 years. But what main thing is we had different producers. We were constantly trying to put their imprimatur on the show, because even though a successful show, they wanted to change it a little bit so that they could say that this is what he did for the show. Well, it was the other way around. It was always a negative thing that made the show less attractive.
So it was Sam Rolfe,
Boris Inkster,
David
Victor, and then the guy the last year who only did the 12 shows, I don't know what his name was. Anthony Spinner. Right, that was the last.
By that time it was...
Well, by that time I was in trouble, and we were going to, our heads were already out of MGM going someplace else.
This is it. We don't see each other that much, unfortunately.
We ran into each other accidentally in Valencia a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And on Broadway, and he lives in New York, I live in Connecticut, and we talk on the phone, and
November
we didn't see each other much when we were doing the show, other than on the stage, because he was married.
No, you took me to a health food restaurant, and I was terribly ill the next day.
We were in.
Now, is that what it was?
Yeah. Well, there have been long lapses where I was in England for 4 years, things like that, but we've kept in touch. We know how each other's children...
There was a wonderful book years ago called Future Shock. That used to describe, yes, and how relationships in certain places you will, in the future, and it described our business as being from the future, but you plug in, all these people come together and plug in and have very close relationships, and when the work is over, you unplug and you all go your separate ways. And that's what happens in this business. And sometimes you get married to some of them. The other things happen. But at the same time, basically, it's an incredibly close relationship that comes together and then ends. The difference here is that the interest in the show has kept the whole thing bubbling and boiling.
And it's not, you can be on a location for a movie for 3 months and see somebody every day, as I did Ben Gazzara and George Siegel on a movie in Prague, and I would swear that we would see each other for the rest of our lives. Now we see each other once every 3 years, because we spent every day, every lunch, every dinner together for 3 months, plus witnessing and experiencing the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union at that time. So it was a very important international event, and we thought we'd be talking about that for years and years and years to come, and that's not the case. I saw Ben years ago once, and George, at Jim Coburn's funeral.
In when we were doing the return, actually, with Michael Sloan, I went into a junk shop on Melrose and bought the Barbie doll of myself as Ilya Kuryakin. I think I paid $104 for it, and I gave it to Catherine and said, "Here you are, you're the only person with a Ken doll of your husband."
It's worth a lot more now, probably.
Probably, yeah.
Oh, it's a Ken doll. You said it was a Barbie doll.
Well, no, sorry. That
was the unique part about it.
It's an Ilya doll,
doll.
shall we say, but it's whatever that nomenclature is. Life's great.
Best 4 years of my life.
Interesting.
Well, considering I didn't have to do anything except change clothes and show up, it was one of my very favorite.
No, it's part of a whole section of one's life, of my life, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time, going from Britain to America to Hollywood to everything that happened. It's got even better since, and I ain't finished.
I was writing something the other day, because I'm writing an autobiography, and I was concluding the section on the Man from U.N.C.L.E, and I think the last line was, "But the most enjoyable part of the show was meeting two exquisite gentlemen and artists, David McCallum and Leo G. Carroll, who was the class of the show, Leo G. Carroll." And that's really what I feel about it.
That's very nice of you. I feel the same way as about you, but I'm not writing an autobiography.
We can contribute to mine. With the Ilya chapter.
it.